And if you say T-DRA, most notable as TT the artist. So, a lot of people know me from TT the artist, but my directing name is T-DRA.
I see. Awesome. Thank you for that clarification. My name is Nina Svet. I'm the head of marketing at LAAIMPA. Very excited to have you here.
Right.
Congratulations, Tidra. Amazing job. Your AI film Mud made a powerful impression and rightfully won Best Horror for its haunting visuals, symbolism, and the unique way artificial intelligence became a true co-creator.
Hmm.
We would
Yes.
love to know more about your creative process. How did
Hmm.
the idea for Mud begin? Did you guide the AI's vision or let it lead the narrative?
Hmm. So originally, what motivated me to create Mud was at the time I wanted to participate in this AI horror film competition sponsored by Curious Refuge. And, it's a very competitive competition because there's over like 400 submissions. And so when you think about AI and then you think about AI in terms of short filmmaking, you really have to try to find a way to create not only a story that fulfills, what that particular competition is looking for, but also how do you create something that speaks to who you are as a director? And that was my goal. My goal with Mud was to make people move beyond just seeing it as AI, but actually making people feel something. And I do think that I accomplished that in different ways. So generally, my process was, of course, locking into a script. But what really sparked the premise of it was I grew up in a very religious, Christian-based faith, Pentecostal, which is very, very strict. And all my life, I had all these restrictions, which later on, resulted in religious trauma. It resulted in identity crisis as I was growing up and trying to find my own voice and own place in this world. And all of these different ideologies that are against people who are often marginalized, such as the LGBTQIA plus community, and how that impacts how we navigate these spaces. That was really the inspiration behind it. So I started with something that felt very real for me, which was the Lord's Prayer. It's a symbol from, my childhood of, you say the prayers whenever you do wrong. You say the prayer when you go to sleep. You say the prayer when you have a bad dream. You say the prayer when you sin. And, that to me is pretty horrifying considering it wasn't really the solution to many of my everyday problems that I was experiencing outside of the the trauma and the identity crisis that I was having. That didn't solve my problems. So I just wanted to make a story that also genre blended something very traditional like horror and brought in queer romance. And what do you get when you bring those two worlds together while having a message? And so, yeah, I started out with, this Lord's Prayer is what kicked it off. And then I started to build my character around that and show Jake his struggle, his evolution of trying to be this individual that the world accepts, but realizing in the end, he is who he is and accepting himself is the most important thing.
Wow, that is so inspirational. I think that is such a unique way of choosing the horror genre to convey such an important romantic, there's so much love involved with the main character. But I think that's what brought this to success. And I'll be honest with you, I get so emotional when it comes to horror genres. So usually I watch it under the blanket just so I know that I'm cozy. But this one really triggered something different inside of me. It wasn't just, oh my God, like it's a screamer. Like usually we see those types of submissions because everyone is just trying to make it very high technology, robots, etc., etc. This one really triggered a lot of emotions, a lot of love. And you can start thinking, what if I was this person? What if I was going
Right.
through this? And My next question is, I was very curious, personally, why did you use a pig um a pig character as the opponent of this love? Why that type of choice and what symbolism is hiding there?
Well, in Christian-based faiths, and a lot of other religions, there's this like thing against eating pork
Right.
or the pig being seen as one of the most dirtiest animals. And so I also, metaphorically looked at that as how a lot of the world tends to view anything that may be outside of what you deem as acceptable. So they would look at, a queer couple and say that that's dirty, it's an abomination, or they will look at a gay couple that's married or a trans person, and just because there's someone that doesn't necessarily identify with what they feel is the society's status quo or norm, they look at it as this disgusting thing. And when we see pigs, we see them, squabbling around in mud and eating scraps. And so for me, that was really the impetus of why I decided to kind of go there. And then, of course, anytime you do anything with animals and also ritualistic practices, there's a lot of times there's like sacrifices with animals, blood and flesh. And I just felt like the flesh and the actual tactile qualities of pigs made so much sense for this movie. And then also when you think about textures and colors, I just loved the things that I could do and explore, and there's so many like metaphoric things that I then learned later on just from the interactions and engagements on social media about even mud and about pigs that a lot of people drew from their own cultural experiences. And it was just kind of cool to see how different people related to that being my main kind of subject as far as like the antagonist or the animalistic characteristics that I wanted to show this kind of like demonized energy in that, physical form. So that was really, what was the inspiration behind the pig being that space that I wanted to be in. And also just playing around with illusion because, mud is something that is dirty. And if you get mud all over your face, if you get mud in your glasses, you can't see. So like with Jake, he couldn't see himself even in the midst of feeling like he's experiencing some sort of liberation or some sort of forgiveness or some sort of purity, the mud was actually making him even fogging up his vision even more and clouding his judgment of who he is even more. In a bigger film, in a bigger world, of course, you would get more into the exposition of like all the more deeper things that we could explore. But, we really actually only had a framework of 3 minutes, and I like to approach still in 3 minutes everything with a act one, act two, act three. So that's, usually the challenge when doing short films. It's like, how do you get, the story out, while also preserving where it could go in a bigger format, like a feature film.
I think you did a great job, honestly, in 3 minutes for someone to as 3 minute horror film for a viewer to feel for this person, especially what I loved the most was the part where the main character, he's sort of getting the blood, he's half a pig, he's getting there, almost losing himself, not recognizing himself.
Mhm.
How realistic that looked. That was insane. The realism is striking.
Mhm.
Was
Thank
that entirely AI generated, or did you refine the output
you.
manually? How did that happen?
Yes, it was all AI generated. And, when I'm working, I always kind of pull inspiration from the style of cameras that are actually used in more traditional filmmaking practices. So I love the Arri Alexa. So I'm always in my prompts incorporating what cameras I use. And then I also, am, incorporating what type of lenses to get, specific type of shots. So very early on in my pre-production process, I'm locking in on my mood boards. I'm finding things that color palette. I like to work where each scene almost exists as its own color tone. So, in the scenes at the beginning, it's very blue and cool and turquoises and, like aquatic. In the scenes of the cult, like the cult like scenes, I wanted to bring in a little bit more grit because this is supposed to feel like it's kind of archival found footage. So I wanted to bring in, of course, CRT, VHS type of vibes. And then when we get to this the cults, the remote location where, he's in the, on the campgrounds, that feels more like nature. So lots of greens and warm colors and smooth, but then also this contrast with like the stark religious moments. Like I think there's a moment where he's like kind of kneeling down, there's a cross in front of him. He's in this like stark white wall space. Like I liked to integrate a little bit of that contrast to start to build some of the tension. So like even though we're, riding along with Jake while he's like having a good time, everything, how all the movies start, everything is all smooth until it isn't. And then the red, the reds, the oranges, the browns, like that to me felt like, of course, if you grew up in a Christian religion, ideologies of hell. Hell is fire, hell is brimstone, hell is just everything just grotesque. So I definitely wanted those parts of the movie to feel like a nightmare. And in a sense, I also approached some of the AI scenes, like when he's running, and I wanted that to feel like a nightmare, a fever dream, where you're just like, you don't know where your perspective shifts. Like in dreams, sometimes you're the person that's moving and you're seeing that POV, and sometimes you're watching yourself. It's a real surreal experience. So it gets a little more trippy as you go on. And then by the end, we go to this like calming beach moment. When we think about water, throughout the movie, water was a theme of cleansing. So, what better way to close it out with just being at the beach, soothing, relaxing, calmness, the sun, and just Jake and his natural self.
I'm so glad you touched up on that because just a little like message to all of the people who are submitting to us. We look at the work only. We never look at the artists. We
Mhm.
need them later on. And when we chose your work as the best horror, we did not know anything about you. I checked out your social media recently, and I think you posted a story either yesterday or today when you were talking about um, there was a helmet in a movie or a film or a music video, I'm not sure, but you were talking about the light on the helmet and you
Mhm.
went into such detail. Like you could talk for hours about the
Yeah.
light on the helmet. And I feel like so many people do not appreciate that and do not think how much thought is put into such simple, supposedly simple thing as
Yeah.
light, as color. And I think
Yeah.
that's exactly what made mud so realistic to us. That's exactly what made us feel the goosebumps when it's just this striking red on
Yeah.
him. Wow. Wow. So, so impressive.
Thank you. That was actually, keeping the character consistency was probably the hardest part because, you know, it, there's times when you're generating and it does tend to give it that plastic skin. And even when you're putting it through the different enhancer and, upscaling, you don't want to lose that tactileness, that touch, that real human quality. And that was my goal. And I had to really, really push. Like it was a really big, big challenge to push because, the thing about AI is we do look at it and say, like, we can tell it's AI. But I feel like with Mud, it did run that fine line of people questioning, like, is this real or if it's AI? The only thing that made it AI, it feels, is me saying this is an AI film. Because you'd really have to like examine it with a close microscope to find those AI moments. And of course, with limitations, of course, they're still developing like the lip syncing and all that. So those are things that I feel just kind of stand out when you do AI films. Like there's no getting around it until the technology evolves even more, but it's getting better and better. And again, I feel that doing short films with AI for an independent artist, I don't have an agent, I don't have a rep. And, I spent some time in Hollywood where I was just trying to be seen, be heard, but because I didn't have as many established credits as maybe someone bigger, you're not always the first choice. So for me, this is opening doors to show people like even without me having a big budget, I can create something that shows you my perspective as a director, or what I could do if I worked with an A24 or a big studio or a Blumhouse. I think that's my goal. I always want to make real films and work with real creators in a sense where we're on set and all of that. But we got to get there. We got to get to the budgets. And I think AI opens an opportunity for people like myself who are independent and give us the opportunity to like use this as an extra stepping stone to get to our bigger goal.
But even as an independent artist, I think you're very humble and it's beautiful and
Oh,
it's
thank you.
beautiful. But those of you who do not know, Instagram is TT the artist.
Yeah.
There's a platinum record there. There are so many successful submissions and wins at other AI
Mhm.
festivals. So very humble, very beautiful. But you're doing an amazing job. And what I wanted to ask you is what surprised you most about AI's creative input? Were there moments where AI was giving you something you didn't plan on using at all, but then you were like, hey, that's cool. Maybe I will use it.
Well, for me, I think sometimes the bad outputs, you can lean into them and use them to your benefit. Like, for example, I had a scene where towards the end, there's this overhead shot and he's running. And the original scene was just supposed to be a tracking shot, but it did something interesting where he's running and it's an overhead and the the ground spins. And I was just like, this feels so appropriate for the psychosis he's going through, or this like kind of crash out he's having right now. And also, it feels dreamlike. And so I thought that sometimes if you take the what they would call AI slop and use those, reverse them, cut them up, find the little gems in that, I think it could bring out more character in an AI film because you're like leaning into the technology. But definitely, like I said, it the character consistency and the dialogue. I would have loved to incorporate more dialogue, but it just wasn't landing. I felt like it was also distracting from the message that I was trying to give. So I had to then find a balance where how can I tell this story without leaving people confused and all over the place. And so that to me was really a challenge. But I think when you are working on your story and script part, that's the main part to kind of carve out that flow and also your mood board. Like, you know, how do these things work? And sound always plays a big part. Like you said, I have two platinum records. So for me, sound plays a big role in my productions. And with Mud, I didn't take a traditional horror film soundscape approach. And I think also, when I was doing these competitions, a lot of people didn't understand that as well as didn't understand the subject matter because you'd be surprised, when you're in a room and you're the only person of color and there's only white judges, who may not have had the shared experiences that you've had, they may not simply find the connection there. And so you may not win for that because they might connect to something a little bit more familiar or just responding to the visual. And for me, if I have to actually work extra harder because I'm trying to tell a story, but I'm also trying to be respected as, oh, she did a good job. So I can't have any holes when I present my work. You know what I mean? If I, want to push through. So, yeah, it's a lot of challenges when you're doing this type of stuff because you never know what people are going to gravitate towards. But it starts with feeling to me, and the sound is so important. And there's a few tricks I even did, like with the cult scene when that comes in. That is actually an EDM track that I actually slowed the tempo down. So it went from like 140 BPM or something like that to like 73. And then it gave me this weird, like almost distorted circus-y type dark sound. And so those are just little things that people don't notice. And even with like the jump scares, they're not meant to be the traditional jump scares. They're more meant to be these kind of peaks that are subtly taking you to where you need to go. And then when the actual jump scare, it's not like I don't even call it jump scares because the tone of the movie was not based around jump scares, traditional horror jump scares. It was just based around the unfolding of the events that are happening.
I think this is truly inspirational for many groups of people, for independent artists, for representatives of the LGBTQ plus community who want to have a voice, who
Mhm.
maybe are in a box right now, who are not able to open up, whether it's for a religious family, whatever issue there is. I feel like this is such a great output using AI to deliver a message, not through just a video saying something motivating people, but through imagery that can actually speak to people on a deeper level. And I am so glad to be interviewing you because this is truly legendary and very, very inspirational. I think a lot of independent artists are scared to start using AI.
Yeah.
Um, what would be your tip for them? Maybe a message you would like to send?
Well, my message to independent filmmakers, creators, whatever space you're in is, technology is evolving. Utilize AI as a additional tool to your toolbox because, the stories are human. You are human. No one can replicate your personal experience. So in a world where there's a lot of what's the word? There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of copycats, there's a lot of appropriation, nothing's original. How you create something that sticks out of that noise and becomes original is by staying true to your experience, your life experience, because everyone's life experience is different. I was not Jake, but I could take some of my own internal experiences and physical experiences that I've had from childhood to being an adult, and I could build a character around that. I'm not a gay man. I'm not a gay man who's in an interracial, biracial, interracial. Sorry, I'm like getting my words twisted, but I'm not in that type of relationship. Um, but we as people, we can relate to trauma. We can relate to religious trauma. We can relate to physical trauma, emotional trauma, and also we can relate to finding our identity or losing our identity. So I would say to independent creators that lean into the new tools because you don't want to be left behind. I saw where AI was going a year ago, and when I started seeing it pop up, I didn't even know. I was like, "What is this?" And it was kind of like when NFTs came out. I was like, "What is an NFT?" I missed the whole NFT phase, by the way. I was like, I can't even understand the process, what it is. Come on, I mean, I did everything, Google. It just wasn't hitting, but it was something about AI. As soon as I saw it, I was like, a light went off in my head because I'm like, it's so many stories I want to tell, and I don't always have a reference point. I don't always have a reference on Pinterest or Google to find, and I'm able to actually craft exactly what I see in my head, and it's actually made me a better communicator. It's made me a better writer because you speak in a visual language when you're working with prompting and things like that, and you bring in the knowledge that you have trained and learned over the years into your AI process. So it's here and it's actually been here. If you're a designer and you use Photoshop, Photoshop is AI. Where we used to have paper, scissors, and glue to create collage, we now can just bring in an image into Photoshop and use tools that were created to simulate real craft making, right? And I'm saying this also from a person with a bachelor's degree in fine arts. So 4 years of training, technically trained painter, technically trained in all different aspects of media. There is AI everywhere, even in our apps that we're using, our computers. So it's not even a matter of a choice that you have, but the choice is how would you like to use the art form to elevate what you're doing. You know what I mean? Because it's inevitable. We're always going to evolve, technology's evolving. And I don't want people to get left behind because they're not embracing change. And that's what I would say. Don't get left behind because you're afraid to embrace change.
I think that was a beautiful message, and I can't think of a better way to end this beautiful interview. Thank you so much, T-DRA,
Thank
for
you.
insight. This was truly inspirational and motivational and exciting, at least for me, and I'm sure for
Yes.
others as well. We're very excited to see what you create next and can't wait for your new films in upcoming seasons.
Yes, I'm excited and I feel so seen and heard by you guys. And I thank you. so much for just the opportunity and sharing your platform with creators like me.
Of course. Thank you so much, T-DRA. Have a great day.
You too. Take care.